We are back. On the show tonight, we have Sean Connery, we have David Brenner and Burt Mustin, and this gentleman, whom I consider a friend and a mighty fine actor, and his latest film is called The Man Who Would Be King, opens here in Los Angeles on the 19th of this month. Would you welcome, please, Michael Caine. Michael. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you, John.
You know, you're beginning to be the reverse of most guests. Most guests I see more on the show than I see them off.
I see you more off than on, yeah.
Yeah, I've been running into you at various sundry affairs and parties and so forth.
Yeah.
How you been?
Very well, marvelous, marvelous.
Remember the last time, last time you were here, we gave you, you expressed a desire, you always want to be a stand-up comedian. And I guess all people want to be something that they don't normally do. They want to be actors, singers, want to be comics, etc. I think we gave you a monologue, and you went out and...
and I did a kind of monologue, yes.
And you did a monologue.
It wasn't as good as yours, I must say. It was a good monologue tonight.
And, was this all right tonight, huh?
Oh, well, yeah. I think Tommy saved you a little bit, but... I think one of the great things about a monologue is to do it with two people.
I think this may be the answer. This is, maybe...
Or even three, right? Because Ed does all that stuff from the side. We don't see him because he can't get the cameras around quick enough.
Did you ever, when you first started, what did you do before you were an actor? Now, with this young gentleman who was out here, Ed used to be, at one time, was a pitchman on Atlantic City and sold the metric Morris. What was that?
Morris metric slicer, yes.
Oh, yeah. I used to sell, one time when I was a very young kid, I used to go on a stall, which is a kind of barrow in a market.
Right.
And I used to sell China Alsatian dogs, German Shepherds, you know, China Alsatian ones.
Right.
And we always used to have two China ones, which you could bank together and say it's a beautiful pair of Alsatians. But the actual Alsatians that you sold to the people were plaster of Paris, which you could make up very quickly.
Oh.
So they used to get them home, and when they get them home, they say, see, they don't, and they used to just crumble. And I used to do that, but that was when I was very young, before I really started work.
Really knew what was going on.
Yeah.
What was the Morris metric slicer?
It was just a device for slicing vegetables, the same thing.
One of those things you see on television that once you get them home...
They never
work, do they?
Oh, you watch the guy on television and rings of carrots are coming out and cubes and little balls of stuff, and you get it home and you cut off 4 fingers. Yeah. Nothing works.
Yeah,
the one we used could cut steel ingots in half, the one we used. Then you got it home, you could just barely get a carrot through there, you know.
Steel shreds.
I remember as a man I worked with who should be nameless, and he was an American who used to do hair restorer until he went bald. And he couldn't do it anymore, but he had a wonderful head of hair, and then he used to do hair restorer on television, and when he went bald, because he had to give it up. And he came to England, where we don't worry about those things.
I wonder if that was the fellow that was, I know who you're talking about.
Possibly.
Anson, I want to say Anson, but I don't know why.
No, we mustn't say anything, must we? We'll all get sued rotten.
Well, if he went bald, he went bald. I mean,
yes, I know.
What did he call himself in England?
He called himself a film producer.
I know who I'm thinking
and in
about.
actual fact, no, he was a very good producer. He produced a picture with me, and he was very good. But it helps to be bald if you're a producer. It inspires confidence.
Yeah, I guess it does. It shows certain maturity.
Yes.
The BBC or most English television do not have commercials like we do, and if the commercials do come, they come at one segment, don't they?
Yes, they come at one.
Which is interesting on English television.
Yeah,
Yes, that's the gentleman's name.
Yes, that's right.
Charles Antel.
Charles Antel, yes. And he's a great friend of mine, and I love him dearly. But no, in English television...
Even though he went
And you
bald.
notice I've still got my hair. No, in England, the commercials on television are kind of announced about every 20 minutes or so.
In other words, a sponsor doesn't buy a particular show. He buys time on the network.
No, he just buys time, and you never get a show presented by anybody. And something which I find a little bit disconcerting in America is someone who you look at who, say, is telling you the news, you know? And he says, war broke out in Vietnam this morning, and the Chinese have joined the Koreans and advanced into... and they do that. Well, in England, they have commercial news as well.
Right.
But what I find a little disconcerting is when the person who's telling you these terrible facts suddenly lifts something up and says, and now we have the mug with the Johnny Carson mug with the coffee in it, which is coffee. And I find this strangely off-putting. You suddenly think, who is there telling me these things? I mean, is it the Lonnish Mendrick Beer Company telling me that the Chinese have come in, or have the Chinese really come in, you know?
Yeah, like the news, like the war is sponsored or something.
Yeah, it sounds as though the news is sponsored, and they say, well, you've got to try and get the Chinese to enter the war in Korea to make it more exciting. Otherwise, no one will watch the commercial.
Yeah. No, they have some wonderful things on English television. And,
your television is much more widespread and much more diverse, and it's kind of more interesting in a way, in a certain way. But the trouble, the main thing is in Britain we have much less television, but there's much more of it that you would want to watch on a ratio.
Mm-hmm.
Because
do they have a show? Do they have a show like this?
They have a show like this. They used to have a show, and no one would believe me when I went back to England. I said, "It's Johnny Carson," and I mentioned all the other people, and they said, "Well, they do a talk show, do they?" So I said, "Yes." Now in England, they do it 50 minutes, one 50-minute show a night, and they rehearse it from Monday to Friday. And when I told them, I said, "Well, you're crazy." I said, "There's a man there, Johnny Carson. I know him. He does 90 minutes a night, 5 nights a week, and has been doing so, I mean, I know now for 13 years, but for then, say, 10 or 9 years when I first met you. And no one in England believed me. This is not possible to do a talk show every night like that.
50 minutes, they do it once a week.
50 minutes once a week, and they get it wrong. It's absolutely
See, that's
true.
the problem. We don't have any time to iron out all of this.
You've got no time to get it wrong.
We
they
just
have
get up
masses
and-
of time to rehearse it and plough everybody into the ground until by the time you come on, you're a nervous wreck. You know what I mean? And you're sitting there, and you've rehearsed it on the Thursday, and then on the Friday, the guy comes and gets you, and you're there 4 hours beforehand.
No.
I mean, to come out here tonight, the guy just dragged me out of the gents.
This kind of a show should be off the cuff.
Yeah, it's got to be off the
Spontaneous,
cuff,
otherwise it's no good at all.
Yeah.
We have to pause for one of those things.
All right,
but no news. The Chinese have not invaded, and we'll be back after a word from one of our many friendly sponsors. And we have returned. We're talking with Michael Caine, and Sean Connery will join us in a moment. David Brenner and Bert Musner here tonight. What else do you do besides selling those plaster Paris dogs?
Oh, I did all sorts of jobs. I was once a night clerk in a hotel of rather bad reputation.
That should have been fascinating.
It was fascinating because I was very innocent in those days. I'd just come out of the army, and I kept letting in people called Mr. and Mrs. Smith of somewhere, and it never fell in. I never fell into the fact that the ladies were rather sullied looking.
No.
I really didn't, and I was thinking, and I eventually found out that they were all doing other than just being Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
Which can be quite boring.
Yes.
And so I started charging them. They used to send down for a pot of coffee or a pot of tea, and I kept putting the price up because I knew no one would dare make a fuss.
Good thinking.
And one day there were a lot of American servicemen in there from in England at that time, and I always remember how I left the job because the one day an American sergeant came in with a young English lady, Mr. and Mrs. Smith they were again, and they went up to the room, and the guy phoned down and said he wanted a pot of coffee, and I thought, American, oh, well, they got more money than everybody, because in England everyone thinks the Americans have got more money than everybody, which is quite true, as a matter of fact. That's why we think that. We're very shrewd over there. And so I thought, 10 shillings, which is a lot of money. A pot of coffee in England at that time would have been 1 shilling and sixpence. And
10 shillings.
10 shillings. I thought, well, he won't know the money. He won't know anything. So I went up to the door, and he opened the door, and he was standing there in his shorts, and Mrs. Smith was lying in a suitable position up the back there. And he said...
That's the American position for tea.
American position.
You're having tea.
And I said, here's your coffee. He says, how much is that? I said, 10 shillings. And he said, 10 shillings, 10... I know the first time I heard the word, I didn't know what that meant. He said, 10 shillings for a pot of coffee, and he went straight in my nose. And I went downstairs and quit.
You're no fun at all.
Well, I was up for a job, and I had a great big swollen nose, and I couldn't do the job, so I was out of work again.
Was this when you were
It was
becoming an actor?
when I was an actor and couldn't get any work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the first work you got?
The first work I got was as an assistant stage manager in a little repertory company, and one night they gave me a part. You know, actors always say, if only they'd give me a part, I know I could become a star.
I don't care how small it is.
How small it is. And they gave me a part, and I came on. I forgot every line I was supposed to say. I went out through the windows of a 50-story building. The play was set in New York, and stepped off the balcony and out into nowhere, and just walked along the stage. 50 stories up.
Fall,
yeah, they're supposed to fall. Yeah. And in the meantime, I'd offered someone a drink and had brought the house down. I hadn't even heard the laughter because I'd given someone a drink. Someone said, "Get a drink," and I'd given someone a drink without taking the cork out of the bottle, and I'd passed empty glasses to everybody, and they were all getting loaded on no whiskey. And I walked off, and when you're very, very nervous, you don't notice all the things that have gone wrong. And by the time I got to the wings, I was absolutely sure that I was star material. Having not said a word, screwed up everything, walked out of the window, and left everybody flabbergasted on stage.
And got wonderful laughs.
And I got wonderful laughs, and I thought my future was assured. I didn't work for about another year after that.
Back to the hotel.
Yeah, back to the hotel, yeah.
I keep asking you every time I see you, because about 6, 7 months ago you were thinking of moving here. Is that...
Yeah, well, I keep thinking of moving here, and every time I do that, I've got a lot of family in England, you know, and
you have a lot of brothers and sisters? And,
No, when I say family, I mean people I grew up with. I have a brother, and I have a mother there, and I have children and everything, and I just cannot get myself to leave the country, and I feel a little like most Americans would if the country was in trouble, America, and you went away.
Right.
There's somehow something in my system which won't allow me to leave when they're down.
It's like you're copping out and running.
Yeah, I'm waiting for him to be a success, and I'm going to say, get out of there.
Last time we were talking, we were at, I think, up at Irving and Lazar's together. Or over at Sammy Kahn's, I guess it was.
Someone told me Irving Lazar came on this program.
He did. I want to ask you about that, because a lot of people thought that was a gag. And we had Irwin Shaw on the other night, who wrote The Night Work.
The Night Work.
Have you read that?
The American? Yes.
No, he wants me for the other part.
The other part, yes.
Miles.
You've been marvelous.
You really think
marvelous.
so?
Absolutely marvelous. You should do it. I've watched you do things, and it's easy. It's easy to be a critic.
Yeah.
And I think you'd make a very good actor.
You
quite
serious?
Sincerely. Yes, I am sincere.
George Burns said, he hadn't made a movie for 36 years. Now he made The Sunshine Boys. George is on the show one night and says, it's easy to be an actor. He says, if somebody knocks on the door and says, come in, and you don't go in, George says, you're a lousy actor.
Yeah, you go in.
He said, if you walk in, he said, you're a good actor. Yeah. He said, if somebody says, how are you? And you say, I'm fine, he says, you're a good actor. If they say, how are you? And you say, I think you dropped it on the floor, you're a bad actor. You have to listen to what they say and react.
Yeah, all you got to do is listen.
Listen and respond. Well,
Sure.
that sounds great in theory, you say.
You'd be able to do it, I'm sure. Absolutely sure.
I'm fascinated.
You should do it. You should do it.
Come back and talk about the wine business for a second,
All
okay?
right, okay.
We'll be right back. Stay where you are. Before we invite your friend Sean to come out, Sean Connery, you mentioned you were in the wine business in a way. What does that mean? You don't have a vineyard, do you?
No, I don't have a vineyard. A friend of mine and I became wine merchants, so we import wine into England. What happened was I only drink wine, you see, so I became so interested, and I was bummed one day, and I went into the business, you know.
Has it been successful?
Yeah, it's very, very, very successful, yeah.
Did you learn a lot about wines you didn't know after you got into it?
Well, once I got into it, there is so much to know about wine, and it's what we've done. We've become a big success in England because we've gone in the lower level of wines where people never know what wine to choose in a restaurant, you know. And if they have a lot of money, they choose the dearest one, and if they don't have much money, they choose the cheapest one. Whereas there's always a sort of way of going in between.
And most people get a little bit intimidated, don't they, when the sommelier or the wine steward comes up and says, would you like the wine list? Because most people really don't know unless you are really,
and the basic principle is never to buy the most expensive one, because all that means is that the restaurant paid more for it. And they usually got on that one. You know? Are we allowed to say that?
That's wine merchants talk.
Wine merchants. It's just a little trade jargon I threw in there.
Trade jargon, yes. You don't import any California wines at all?
Well, my partner is up in the Napa Valley right now, or is on his way back, having talked to a lot of Californian people.
They make good wine in California.
As a matter of fact, some of the Californian wine is some of the best in the world, but the people who don't know it are Californians.
That's right. That's true.
But do you know what they do wrong with it?
What's that?
They drink it too young. They always drink, everywhere I go, they give me Californian wine, and they think it's so awful that they've got to drink 1973 now. if they left it the way the French did, then, you know...
Doesn't depend on the particular harvest, the particular kind of grape.
Well, here you've got no vintage, so because the weather's always more or less the same in the Napa Valley. What you have to rely on is go to the best winemaker, and you have a lot of young guys here who, you know, as opposed to the French who are sort of dyed in the wool and will not change the vats and will not do this and that. Here they make experiments, and if you can find a guy who's made the right experiment, then you've got a good wine.
That's interesting. Okay, I'm going to bring out, is this the first time that you've worked together with Sean in a motion picture?
It's first time in a motion picture, but we worked in television about 12, 15 years ago.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't think he has ever been on the show before. We have crossed paths once or twice socially, but of course I think Sean made his mark around the world the first time that people really, in the success of the James Bond pictures, which he eventually ended up not being particularly enthused about. But he's a fine actor. Would you welcome Mr. Sean Connery? Nice to have you here, finally.
Thank you. This is my virgin move.
Yeah, I think the first time we met each other was back in New York, if I remember, one night at I believe, at Phyllis Newman and her husband's party. Is that correct?
Absolutely right. I didn't know if you'd remember.
I certainly do. How you been?
Very, very well, actually. I remember we both got very drunk.
Yes, that's true, but those days are bye for me now. Oh, and I miss it so. No, I have rethought. I am not really a drinker anymore. I found out I didn't handle it well.
Oh, I wouldn't agree at all. I thought you were charming and funny and...
Yes, but you say you were drunk at the time, so naturally I look charming. You see, that's one of the things about drinking. Everybody is charming when everybody is the same way. But I found all of a sudden when you go to a party and you do not drink, you see people in a strange, different way. They're not...
You don't drink at all?
Not currently.
Well, I do, and...
Would you
I
care?
would like a drink.
Care for a little something?
Yeah.
What would you care for?
Scotch whiskey with soda, please.
Scotch whiskey with soda, certainly.
Yeah, that
White wine.
wine we have.
On the right side of the hill.
I'll have a can of Yoo-Hoo, chilled to exactly 57 degrees.
Is that the Scotch?
That's a Scotch.
Thank you very much.
We really should. It's really not Scotch. We're
not
pretending because on television, you see, you can pretend it's a prop or something.
Pretend it's Scotch.
Pretend it's Scotch.
Okay, it's Scotch.
Sure.
If you use your imagination, that'll probably taste, just to make sure. It's just water.
Oh, for the good old days. Holy.
Anyway, I just asked Mike before you came out. You did make a picture together about 15 years ago, right?
Television.
Television. Made for.
Well, we did television more recent that was shown here in America, but
We weren't
we
together,
never
it was
went
episodes.
together. He ended up with my daughter. You see? I never met Charles Antel.
But in the film that we got opening at Christmas, he winds up with my wife.
Yeah.
That's the way
In the
it works.
film, yeah.
We have a.
I got a better deal.
It was a better deal, actually.
We have a small clip from the picture, The Man Who Would Be King. I don't know, does this need a little setting up? Do you know what particular segment we have of the picture? Either one of you fellas?
Yeah, I know what it is. It's Christopher Plummer is Rudyard Kipling. It's a story by Rudyard Kipling about two men he met, and he wrote a story about their adventures. And included in the film is the meeting with Kipling where they tell him what they're going to do.
Okay, watch the monitors here in the studio, and we'll show you the small clip from The Man Who Would Be King. I think I was in that outfit during the war. We had a...
There's always one in the
Always one. We'll take a short break. We're coming right back. We're back. We're talking with Sean Connery and Michael Caine. I forgot to ask, when does this picture come out, The Man Who Would Be King? Is that...
somewhere in December, around 17th or 18th here,
Right.
I think.
19th here. We're in Los Angeles?
Yes.
19th
Yeah,
here.
19th.
Do you ever lose track of where you are when you're out on a tour? I had Peter O'Toole on the show one night, And this was several years ago. And people thought he was bombed out of his gourd because he may well have been, but he wasn't that night. He'd just been on one of those tours. He'd flown in from England. He was about 7 hours behind. And every time I would say something, he would just go, and I would say, excuse me, Peter, how is the picture going? He'd say, the picture going. So during a commercial, I said, are you all right? And he said, I'm absolutely, with the time lag, didn't know really where he was, in New York or Los Angeles.
The first time I ever did your show, I had never been in America, and I went on television they woke me up at 6 o'clock in the morning, said, hurry up, we're going on television. I said, at 6 o'clock in the morning, there's no one watching. And they said, yes, there will be, rely on us. And I went and did the Today Show with 20 million viewers, 40 million viewers or something.
Right.
And I never understood. And that evening, just as I was going to sleep, I said, come on, we're going to do the Tonight Show. So I said, but it was something like 10 o'clock at night, 11:30 at night. I said, no one will be watching, because in England, the television then used to start at 4 in the afternoon and finish at 11. So to have someone say to me, you've got to do TV at 7:30 in the morning seemed ridiculous. And especially at 11:30 at night. And I went on these two shows, which I figured no one was watching, which turned out later to be the Today Show and the Tonight Show. And I'd made a fool of myself in front of 60 million people.
Let me see if this is an accurate quote. I think you said after you'd done a number of the Bond pictures that it almost made life impossible for you. Is that fairly...
Well, it was very difficult. For example, the one I had decided finally to do, which was in Japan, You Only Live Twice, it was far too pressurized. It was a 6-month involvement shooting in a very, very hot country. The temperature was 110 or so in Kagoshima. And when we arrived in Tokyo, there was about 500 of these photographers and press. And you talked with them, did whatever you could with them, and then even if you went to the toilet, they were still there. There was no escape, and it wasn't too well programmed that you could do anything except film, and then you finished the film, and then they were expecting you to meet them again after you'd been filming.
Right.
So I was under a great deal of pressure, and I made many statements because I never had a press representative or anything, and
Right.
the chap who was supposedly representing the company then, him and I didn't see eye to eye anyway. I don't blame him, he was just wrong.
Most fellas, when they would see those pictures, because they're fantasy pictures, they were really fantasy pictures, the man with the girls and sophistication and so forth, would say, hey, what a role, you know, in their mind to play. Did you find that when you went out that people attached you to that character, as they often do? And
Well, yes, there's a lot of... I mean, I enjoyed a lot of the work that one did in the films, and, you know, certainly no disrespect at all to it. I worked and enjoyed a lot of it, but a lot of the other things I couldn't handle, and when I eventually reached the stage where I thought, well, 5 was enough,
Right.
And got out.
Yeah.
But I went back and did the 6th.
They were fascinating pictures, though.
Well,
Yeah,
many
they really
people
were.
enjoy them.
They were
Yeah.
fascinating pictures, and the effects and the whole thing. I asked Mike what he did before he became an actor. What did you do, Sean?
Well, I became an actor when I was about 22. I'd had many different jobs, and I was working for the Edinburgh Evening News, and I came down to London for the Mr. Universe contest. I was a weightlifter then, and I came representing Scotland because, well, they didn't have anybody in the tall man's class. And during the time I was there, they had auditions for South Pacific. So I went along and told them I was an actor and sung a few bars, and anyway, they bought it, and so I resigned from the newspaper, and then I went on tour with South Pacific.
That's
how
where it started,
Yeah.
Now, when you started making pictures, but did you have a little more of a Scottish accent than you have now, or a little more of a...
Well, I've always had a Scottish accent. I'm very reluctant to lose it. I've always... well, he's the same. He's got that. He's still got a Cockney voice, and I think Burton still has basically a
You don't want to
Welsh
lose.
voice.
It's a kind of roots thing.
Right.
Yeah,
I've
and
never. Anyone can tell where I come from, and I don't say it as particularly proud or something. I say that's me, and that's
Right.
it.
So I think that it's a period when there used to be more. It was necessary to have a definitive negative English BBC type voice, which is really no longer necessary. I mean, I think America was as much responsible as any country for breaking through on that level.
Right.
And then all the regional dialects, you know, like all the guys like O'Toole and Finney and Harris and Courtney and Bates, Michael, they're all just North Country, Irish, whatsoever, suddenly started to have as much meaning and colour, I think, more than the straight English.
Right.
Because the Americans always had the first working class actors anyway. We never, I mean, you had them in the 30s when you had Muni, Robinson, Cagney, Bogart, and they were working class characters with different kinds of working class voices. In England, you never had that. I mean, in 1948, when I walked into an office and said I wanted a job with a Cockney accent, they'd say, well, we don't have any newspaper boys on street corners in this picture, you know?
That's an interesting point.
And as though the 50-odd million people in England who speak with a working class accent didn't exist. It was a precious few making movies for a few precious.
That's very interesting. We'll take a break. We're coming right back. Stay with us.